Welcome back to the I Am Passionate podcast. I hope you all are doing well. And we've got week 3 of NFL football action coming at you really, really quickly. And, we're going to start off the episode, with my power rankings, which I'm going to have on the screen right now. Obviously the first, about half of the list, so about the first 15, 16 teams basically, they're going to be a bit of a bigger screenshot. And then, the rest are going to be a bit smaller just because I need to think of a way to make this list a little bit more visually appealing. But, just more simple reasonings for each team. I didn't dive too much into it, wanting to keep the list as simple as possible, but yet have as genuine of a reason as to why I thought each team is where they are. And so, certain teams that I noticed, had, just kind of moved around a lot on my list. Yeah, not the Chargers, I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong team. The Chiefs, sliding closer and closer out of that top 10. The Colts, I'm putting them in the top 10, which it's the first few weeks of the season. These power rankings, at least when I come up with them on my own, they're going to fluctuate a lot. Um, team like the Falcons, they moved up a bit. I think Bijan really could make a case for the Offensive Player of the Year award. Really could. Uh, other teams that, they may be 2-0 or 0-2, like Chiefs being 0-2. Yes, the Bengals are 2-0, but Joe Burrow is out. So, how good do I think they'll look without Joe Burrow compared to the Chiefs, so despite them being 0-2, with they still have Patrick Mahomes? And certain other teams, I had to realize that maybe I was being a little too optimistic about those teams, and so trying to think a little bit more, with the numbers, with the facts, with what basically has been what they've shown in the first 2 weeks. But I will say though that kind of, let's just say from basically the bottom 5 teams, I would say are kind of interchangeable. Um, Specifically the worst 2 teams between I would say the Dolphins and the Panthers. If you want to throw the Titans in there, if you want to say the Titans, the Dolphins, and the Panthers are the worst 3 teams in the NFL, like I think that's a fair statement. I just think for me they're kind of interchangeable. The reason why I don't think the Browns are the worst team in the NFL is because despite them putting up 41 points, like having 41 points put on them last week, they still do have a good defense. They just don't have an offense. So, it's at a point where you could have a good defense, but that defense is going to get tired eventually if the offense can't stay on the field. And because of that, you could have, basically teams put up insane points. But that's kind of just my power rankings for going into this week. Let me know what you all think of these power rankings. What would you change? What do you, agree with? Let me know what you all are thinking. But right now, I still think the clear cut best team in the NFL, I think it's the Buffalo Bills. I think they're the best team in the league so far. I think it's their spot to lose. And I think for a team like the Ravens, I think if they play with the mentality that they had against the Browns, like if the Ravens approach each week like the opponent that they are playing is a divisional opponent, I think they will play just amazing. I think they will really have a shot. I think they will be able to get rid of that narrative in January that they lose the playoff games that they should win. That's just my Ravens take. Moving on to the prediction record. At the end of the season, I'm going to kind of add up, like my total like predictions in week 1, it was 10-6. Week 2 had a much better week. My misses were pretty bad, like the Bears. They got their face stomped in. They were getting curb stomped. And especially with me saying I thought their defensive line would make the difference. I thought their defensive line would make the difference because I wasn't sure about how I felt about the Lions' offensive line. That's why I thought I'd give them a chance. But I was 13-3 in week 2 with the wins from the Packers, Dallas, Rams, Bills, Patriots, Cincy, 49ers, the Ravens, the Cardinals, the Eagles, the Falcons, the Bucks, and the Chargers. And the losses I had coming from the Steelers, the Bears, the Broncos. The loss that kind of surprised me the most, I would say, is the Broncos, simply just because I did not expect Daniel Jones to basically have a great two first games, which I saw something from ESPN on Instagram. Essentially, Daniel Jones is, from a fantasy football perspective, is being outscored only by one player, and that one player is Lamar Jackson. And also, in the two games, Daniel Jones total, I believe, has five total touchdowns to no turnovers. He's playing pretty good football right now. He's playing, clean football. He's kind of looking like, AKA the Danny Dimes that would have led the Giants to the playoffs in Brian Dable's first year with the team, which I think was in 2022. Someone correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments below. But the win that surprised me the most, um, looking at them, I wouldn't say any of the wins particularly surprised me. I would say that I was more surprised that Dallas was in such a shootout and that a lot of people online were talking about, you know, this game has potential to be game of the year, while the other side is basically saying if the Bills and Ravens in week one did not happen, the Cowboys and Giants would be game of the year, which I do think both were great games. So moving on to my top five games in week two. This week, in my opinion, it kind of just doesn't really have an order because I think week one was a better week of football all around. And week two, I feel like was just a little bit more just meh. Like, I don't really know how to explain it other than just meh. But what I have in my number one spot is the Bucks versus Texans. Both teams played so well on defense. It kind of took a while for the offenses to just like get going with more so like the bigger play kind of threats, which there wasn't really a crazy amount of big plays. It was kind of like both teams, specifically the Bucks, whenever they would, march down the field, they had to earn every single yard. Like there was I want to say 4th and 10, which like the Bucks had to have this or else, they would have needed a stop on defense to then have the drive down the field to win the game. Baker Mayfield got it with his leg. Like he picked up like what, about 15 yards on that, first down scramble, and he got up and I believe it was CJ Gardner Johnson's face. Which, Baker Mayfield, he is a likable quarterback. Yes, his first couple of years he was very, very cocky. And I'm sure he's still a little cocky now, don't get me wrong, but he is still just a very likable quarterback. I feel like the Browns in the like they will probably never admit it, but they probably do regret not having Baker Mayfield right now because if you put Baker Mayfield, on like last year's Browns or the year before, they probably go farther than what they did. They probably do. But always fun seeing a defensive battle. Second, you probably thought I was going to put this at number one, the Cowboys versus the Giants. The overtime period being a punt fest kind of ruined it for me. Both teams had an offensive explosion in the fourth. I believe the Cowboys scored 20 points and the Giants scored 21, which there was, I think, 7 lead changes in the fourth quarter, which was just insane. But then just forgetting how to play football in overtime was just so meh. Like Russell Wilson had a moment where he was going for a pump fake. I believe he was trying to check it out to the running back, and it kind of just slipped out of his hands for a fumble. Then basically his air quote arm punt, which was an interception, was bad. Um, yeah, just the overtime period just was not the finish I was expecting for the Cowboys and Giants game. I kind of was expecting one team to not like have like a big play down the field. Like I wasn't expecting a 75-yard touchdown or anything. I was more so kind of expecting essentially whoever got the ball first to go on a drive. Essentially either A, get their touchdown, or B, potentially stall out, giving the other team like them knowing what they need, and then the other team getting what they need. But yeah, no, it was cool to see like an overtime game, and plus I didn't expect that from the Giants. I don't know who did. Cowboys offense looks great. It does. My number three slot, I have the Jags versus the Bengals. I'm more surprised that this game was close because I thought the Bengals were going to just destroy the Jaguars, kind of in the same way I thought the Cowboys were going to destroy the Giants. I was expecting the Bengals to put up more points, but Joe Burrow got hurt, which I think that, you know, I saw somebody on TikTok basically saying that he believes that the Bengals have been investing in the offensive line, Which yes, they have had some draft. They I believe drafted the guy from Georgia last year, the tackle, and some of their guards I think have a good Pro Football Focus score, but and then they mentioned Orlando Brown because he was a former Pro Bowler, but I don't think basically somebody being a former Pro Bowler, like I don't think the Pro Bowl or All Star means all that much. They're going back to the season Lamar Jackson got hurt. Tyler Huntley was a Pro Bowler, and I think Tyler Huntley is a good quarterback. I don't think he's a starting caliber quarterback, but the fact that he was named to the Pro Bowl was crazy. And also, I understand that the NFL tried getting a couple different players to the Pro Bowl at that time, but they opted out. Just that's a different story. That's a different podcast episode. If the Pro Bowl or All Star game, the NBA, if they mean something. But I just think that I don't think the Bengals have invested in their team the way that they needed to. I don't think they have. So I think, him being out for as long as he will be, I'm just curious to see if they'll be able to stay afloat. And let's just say if they're in a good position when Joe Burrow comes back, do you put Joe Burrow back in the starting lineup? Or if they fall down a cliff, do you just let Browning just be the quarterback for the rest of the year and just prepare for next year? That's the question. But the last thing really to talk about with the Jags versus Bengals, let me know what you all thought about basically the call on Travis Hunter that resulted in a defensive pass interference on if you thought that was defensive pass interference or not. Because I kind of think it was one of those where like think they should have called it, but it's kind of one of those where like one week the refs are going to call that, the following week they might not call it. So let me know what you all think about that down below. For my fourth spot, I have the Broncos versus Colts. The Colts offense played much better than I was originally expecting them to. I did not think Daniel Jones was going to look that good against, the Broncos defense. He had 300 yards. He threw for a touchdown. I believe he ran a touchdown. Uh, Jonathan Taylor had 165 yards, which I didn't think he was going to get that many yards. Like, not to discredit JT's, talent. He's a great running back, but I thought the Broncos defense was just going to limit Jonathan Taylor and then force Daniel Jones to throw. But here's the thing: they couldn't stop either one. Jonathan Taylor was, averaging, or doing the math, if I had to guess, that's probably about 5, maybe 6 yards a carry. Just doing the math at the top of my head. Um, and then Daniel Jones threw for 300 yards. He's arguably the most talked about quarterback in football as of right now. But for the Broncos to also lose the way that they did, because I believe the Colts originally kicked a 60-yarder, missed it, and then there was a flag because of leverage, and then the kick, basically moved from 60 to 45, much more manageable because not everybody has Brandon Aubrey. Um, yeah, that's just the heartbreaking way to lose. Even Sean Payton himself said in his post game interview that losing like that's gonna sting for a while. That's gonna sting for anybody. I'm not even a Broncos fan, and it's like, dang, yeah, that hurts. My final game, just the 49ers versus the Saints. Mac Jones and Spencer Rattler both played really, really well. It was a clean game of football from both sides, and the game pretty much stayed within reach the entire time. For a minute, I kind of thought the Saints were gonna, find a way to, get the win, but 49ers, in their defense, they stepped up when it mattered most. And hey, that's what you just need them to do. That's what you need them to do. So let me know down below what you thought your top 5 games were from week 2, and let me know if you think moving forward, because I do like my top 5 games. Should I start doing my top 5 worst games, or worst as in most like boring games, like the games where basic, basically a game that would have been probably the worst game last week was the Bears getting brutally destroyed against the Lions last week. That would have been I think the worst game last week. But let me know if you're interested in hearing what you think I think the worst games are. So, moving on to my week 3 predictions. Thursday night football this week is the Dolphins versus the Bills. According to StatMuse, Josh Allen is 12-2 against Miami all time, winning his last 5 games. Miami likely will be desperate considering that they're 0-2. People are calling for Mike McDaniels and Tua's jobs. People are saying that the Tua experiment is over. And, like, I saw some people, basically talking about when Brian Flores was the Dolphins head coach and, the whole Tank for Tua campaign. at that time period, which, hey, it is what it is. But it's in the Dolphins' benefit to play more aggressive instead of playing it too safe because I think if you play it aggressive, even if you lose, I think that goes to, hey, you're trying to win the game versus you're playing too safe to lose the game. But I see that, Josh Allen having another good game with the offense firing on all cylinders. Give me the Bills to win this game 41-21, and potentially I would not be surprised if we saw Mike McDaniel be the first head coach fired this year. I don't know if there is, I guess, a record for the shortest amount of time a head coach would have been, the head coach of the season, or if they look for an interim head coach. Not be surprised if this is the game where they just decide to, Mike McDaniel, you're gone. And plus, Mike McDaniel, he'll be on somebody's staff next year if he gets fired as the Dolphins head coach. Moving on to the Bengals versus the Vikings. This is the battle of the backups. Bengals quarterback is Jake Browning against the Vikings quarterback Carson Wentz. Do y'all remember when Carson Wentz was an MVP candidate? That was like 2017. That was crazy. But Jake Browning will likely be extra motivated because the Vikings cut him a few years ago. A few seasons ago, I believe I think it might have been the season where Joe Burrow had the wrist injury. Um, but the Bengals matched up against the Vikings, and Jake Browning, which basically he led a comeback to beat the Vikings that season, and basically he was on the sideline, which there was a video probably from more like probably NFL cameras or maybe Cincinnati Bengals cameras caught it, basically him saying that y'all shouldn't have cut me. Um, but I wonder about the Vikings. Will their offense finally play good football for the entire game? Because in reality, they've only had one good quarter of football, and that was the fourth quarter of football against the Bears. I'm curious about that. But my score prediction, give me the Bengals 25. Yes, 25-24. I believe the Bengals are going to go for the 2-point conversion to get the win. I don't think they're going to want to play for overtime. Moving on to the Texans versus the Jags. CJ Stroud does play pretty well against the Jaguars, but I can see things this year being a little bit different. The Texans aren't looking as good on offense. The offensive line for the Texans is worse, probably the worst offensive line that Stroud probably has kind of dealt with because at least like his rookie year, they kind of compensated for that in different ways. But I can see the Jags trying to, send, basically their offensive line, a lot of stunts, some different kind of blitzes just to make CJ Stroud's life, like just to put him in the blender. But in regards to the Jags, this defense is the best defense that the Jaguars will have to play all season. Well, not all season, this season so far. It's a young season still. We're only in week 3. But give me the Texans to pick up their first win, 23-20. I see the Texans getting in field goal range and their kicker making a longer field goal. I'm not saying no 60 something yarder, but it'll be like a 50 something yard field goal for the win. Moving on to the Colts versus the Texans. In the past, I kind of would have thought this would have been a much more even matchup, like the last few seasons. Both teams haven't really looked all that good, but the Colts are balling right now. The Colts are, I'd say, the more shocking team in the league right now. And I don't think that there will be this year's version of the Saints because I was high on the Saints after they started 2-0. Then, they just kept, the Saints got hurt and pretty much they just fell off a cliff. But I do still wonder how long will the Colts be able to keep up, how well they're playing. But if I was the Titans play caller, I would try to run the ball a little bit more because Cam Ward is just, I believe he's gotten sacked 11 times and they've had a lot of third and longs. They're just not able to stay ahead of the chains. I would not be surprised if the Titans end up drafting, a star running back in college football because I already kind of have the assumption that they're going to end up with a top pick. I'm not saying they're going to have the number 1 overall pick, but I can see them picking within the top 5 and then picking a running back just to be able to take some of the pressure off of Cam Ward and then beefing up their offensive line. But if you stay ahead of the chains, if you stay in third and manageable, Cam Ward is not going to have to play hero ball as much. Like having that running back, having that team who can maybe you can throw play like a drag route, and then maybe somebody can make a man miss, pick up the first down. But the Titans this year, they're just not really be able to do that. Give me the Colts 28-25. I think the Titans will give the Colts a scare as this is a division rival game. It's not every division, but a lot of divisions in the NFL when it's, a division game, division rival game, it's tends to be a pretty decent game. Moving on to the Raiders versus the Commanders. Both of these teams had a great week 1, but a sloppy week 2. The Commanders couldn't really get anything going on offense against the Packers, while the Raiders could not take care of the football against the Chargers with Geno Smith throwing 3 interceptions. The memes literally were basically saying that he wrote back, but I'm not gonna lie, some of those were funny, but it is what it is. I think this game could go either way, but I think this depends on if Jaden Daniels play this game. Because if he does play, I see them winning. But going off what I know right now, I'm gonna take the Raiders 17-14. It's gonna be a lower scoring game. I believe Genty's gonna have his most efficient game so far. And for this, for that game with my record, if I'm counting it, if the Raiders win, obviously I'm gonna count it as a win. But I will acknowledge that if Jaden Daniels does play, and if the Commanders end up winning this game, I will acknowledge that at least that prediction was right. But in regard to me picking the winner, that obviously is going to be wrong if the Commanders end up winning. Moving on to the Rams versus the Eagles. I do believe this would be the best game of the week, or at least of Sunday, because this was one of the better playoff matchups from last year, going down to the final play where Jalen Carter, I believe, got the sack on Matthew Stafford. He either got the sack or basically forced a throwaway. I don't remember which off the top of my head. But this Rams offense can put up some points while playing some pretty good defense. But this Eagles team is the best team that they've played so far. I think for the Eagles, they're going to have to put up some points. In 2 games, they don't have a single passing touchdown, but they've been able to basically run the ball, not really have to face too many third and longs, which, and also the power of the tush push, which I would not be surprised if the tush push is banned next season, because you had Dean Blandino talk about how he's done officiating that play, which I understand because you can't see that ball. If we're like, there's a lot of times where they ran it against the Chiefs where you just could not see where the ball was. You could not see, like, truly, like, I'd imagine as a referee, you can't reverse some of those calls because Jalen Hurts could have ended up actually being short of the sticks. But yet it's such a play where everybody's so close that it's hard to, just truly officiate it. Yes, there are the times where it's clear cut that, Jalen Hurts gets the first down. But then there just as many times as it's clear cut, it's where, times where you just can't truly tell. And so I believe if the play is going to get banned, the NFL saw everything that they needed because of the Chiefs game. But in regards to a score prediction, I'm going to take the Rams. Give me the Rams to win 31-30. I believe Puka Nakua will get a last second touchdown for the win. Falcons versus Panthers. This is another divisional game, which in my opinion, are usually entertaining for the most part. If I had to guess, Bijan is going to have a great game because the Panthers do not have a good run defense. But for the Panthers, they need to stay ahead of the chains. They need to, which I understand every team needs to stay ahead of the chains, but some teams are at least built to get out of a 3rd and 10, a 3rd and 12 situation. The Panthers are not that team. Last week, Bryce Young threw the ball 55 times against the Cardinals, which I understand they're, deficit, they were losing basically the entire game, which is why he had to throw the ball more. But you do not want him throwing the ball 55 times. I think there's only a few quarterbacks where if they have to throw the ball that many times, you're going to be a little bit more okay with it. Bryce Young is not one of them. And even so, I don't think you want Patrick Mahomes to throw the ball 55 times. I don't think you want Josh Allen, Matt Stafford, even Jalen Hurts to throw the ball 55 times just because, you got those people I named, they have their strengths with, being able to run the football. But I think they need to have a consistent run game, be able to take some of the pressure off of Bryce Young. But my score prediction for this game will be 26-18 Falcons. I think Bryce Young and the Panthers overall will basically play their best game overall. But I think the Falcons, I think Bijan is going to have too good of a game where the Panthers might have a chance to basically get back on the field to at least tie the game to force OT, but they won't get that third down stop. Moving on to the Steelers versus the Patriots. In 2018, this would be like the game of the week. But the Steelers have a lot of injuries right now on the defensive end, and teams are also finding success running the ball away from TJ Watt. I believe when he was talked about on ESPN, it was Dan Orlovsky, I believe. He was the main one. I remember him speaking about it. When teams run the ball toward TJ Watt, teams are averaging like 2.4 yards a carry. And then when teams run away from TJ Watt, they average like 6 yards. If the Steelers first, they have to switch up their creativity on defense. They have to move TJ Watt around because, like, referring to Micah Parsons, you'll see him line up as the defensive end on the right side, the left side, interior. He can play all over. And, TJ Watt, he is a great pass rusher. He is. I believe you can move him around at least, on right to left. I would understand if you don't want him to play on the interior, even though I believe that he can. But I think I don't think you want to keep him on the right side of the field. Like, in my mind, what I'm thinking of is back in the Legion of Boom days. I believe Richard Sherman would always stay on one side of the field. I believe it was mostly the right side of the field, which it worked for them. It did. But I think TJ Watt primarily staying where he is. Um, I don't think it works for them in the same vein that it worked for Seattle, which I understand that one different times for football is different from today was it was when I'm referring to that Seahawks team. And two, Richard Sherman and TJ Watt play two different positions. I'm aware of that. But I think that in football today, I think you need to have your players move around a little bit more on the defensive end. I don't think you want to have your players lined up in the same spot every single time because you can easily be taken out of a game just from being, if the other team is being able to run the football. But I believe if the Patriots commit to the run, I can see them being very successful passing the ball. But if the Steelers switch up their style of defense, they could make it a long day for Drake May. But I'm going to go 24-20 Patriots. I don't know if the Steelers are going to have all those players that that basically got banged up last week. I don't know if some of them are going to basically miss this game. So give me the Patriots to get this win. Moving on to the Packers versus Browns. I'm picking the Packers to win this game. I don't have much to say. The Packers are playing some pretty good football right now, and having Micah Parsons on your team allows the Packers to blitz a lot less, and they can get to the quarterback with just four. The Browns do still have a good defense, despite the Ravens putting up 41 on them last week, which I think they can cause some trouble for the Packers. And my question is, how will their offense respond? I'm gonna say Green Bay to win this game 28-7. I'm saying 28-7 is I can see this game being basically in Cleveland's reach, like where they'll have at least a chance. But in the fourth quarter, I can see, basically maybe the Packers force two turnovers to, get the offense, back on the field. I can see this game being a low scoring game in the fourth quarter. That I can just see the Browns like just not being able to do anything in the fourth quarter. Moving along to the Jets versus the Bucks. Baker Mayfield is playing out of his mind right now. He's been playing great since being on the Bucks. I saw during the broadcast when they played the Texans that since being on the Buccaneers, he has the most touchdown passes in the fourth quarter. He's a, he's been clutch on the Buccaneers. He has, for the most part. Um, and he did take a lot of hits against the Texans, but I believe he'll end up being fine. And then, moving on to the Jets, how will the offense look? Fields had a concussion against the Bills, and he was already ruled out, and so Tyrod Taylor will get the start. I imagine that Tyrod Taylor, the ball will be out a lot faster. I believe we're going to see a lot more quick game, which eventually I think the Jets will start out with the quick game, but then Tyrod Taylor will take his shots, deeper down the field just because Tyrod Taylor being a veteran quarterback. Um, but I think the team will be a little bit more pass first. Not that Tyrod Taylor can't scramble, but Justin Fields being a better dual threat quarterback than Tyrod Taylor. Also, just because the age difference between the two. But you still have to account for Tyrod Taylor's ability to scramble. But I'm going to take the Bucks to get the 35-14 win. I think the Bucks defense is going to just cause major problems. Moving on to the Broncos versus the Chargers. This is another important AFC West game, just like last week between the Raiders and the Chargers. The winner of this game could end up being in a tiebreaker situation later in the season. And so the Broncos offense did not play bad last week. The defense did not play as well as expected. I don't see that happening 2 weeks in a row. The Chargers have been playing well on both sides of the ball, and they have not been a run first team like they were last year. Last year, under Greg Roman's scheme, they ran the ball a lot, which it worked out for them. They got to the playoffs. This year, the play calling is a little bit more innovative. Basically being deadly in the pass and also having a very efficient run game. I'm gonna take the Broncos to beat the Chargers 20-17, and I believe the Broncos will have a chance to, have the, division lead because of beating the Chargers. Saints versus Seattle. This could be a potential upset alert. The Saints, even though they're 0-2, they've been in two close games and they show fight throughout the game. Both games, that they played in, you know, against the Cardinals and the 49ers, they did have a chance to at least tie or take the lead late in games. And so I think, they're showing that fight, they're showing that effort, which I think, does get you at least kind of far. It might not get you far like with winning a crap ton of games, but it at least will keep you in a game. Seattle, they do have a really good roster, and I also think their defense will be able to make this game very easy on the offense. I think Seattle will have some short fields where they just take advantage of the short field situation. Give me Seattle to get the win 21-10. Moving on to the Cowboys versus the Bears. A lot of people on social media are questioning how many wins will the Bears end up getting. I do think that this will be a good game, but I think there's questions for both of these teams. How will the Cowboys defense bounce back? Letting up 37 points to the Giants is not something that you should be proud of. And then for the Bears, when will you stop looking like a JV team? They are not using any of the talent that they drafted, and honestly, that's just making them look worse. Like, it was very questionable when they drafted Colston Loveland, even though that I understand that Ben Johnson likes having, basically, two good tight ends. He likes, having a good tight end room, which I can understand that. But your more pressing need was, offensive line, defensive line. That was your more pressing need, which I understand. They have a left tackle that they drafted in the second round. They have a defensive tackle that they drafted, I believe, also in the second round. But both did not play last week. That's just some questions. But I'm going to take the Cowboys to win this game 28-20. I think people will think the Cowboys are kind of running away with the game, but the Bears will slowly creep back into it and have a chance, but I think they'll come up short. Moving on to the Cardinals versus the 49ers. This is the battle of the undefeateds. Could be important, just like, the Broncos and Chargers game. The 49ers are missing Brock Purdy again, so I think it'll all depend on how well Mac Jones plays. I'm expecting a very heavy CMC game just to, being able to stay ahead of the chains. And also the Cardinals, they haven't really looked amazing, but they haven't looked bad either. And Marvin Harrison Jr., he, last week he had 2 receptions. The first game he had 5 receptions. So he's just it's almost like the Cardinals don't know how to use him, if that makes sense. But I also wonder if the Cardinals are a product of their early season schedule. Even the 49ers to get this win 28-13. I believe Mac Jones will put together another good game. Sunday Night Football between the Chiefs and the Giants. Who will get their first win? This is the first time in his career that Patrick Mahomes is 0-2. Never thought I would have said that if I'm being completely honest. I do still think they would have ended up losing against the Eagles, even if Kelsey did not drop that easy touchdown pass he should have caught. The offense needs to get healthy because them missing Rashid Rice to suspension, Xavier Worthy to injury. That's just they just I think they just cannot reliably get down the field for 4 quarters with what they currently have. And yes, Mahomes did miss some throws to number 80, I think Tyquan Thornton, I believe that's his name. He missed some throws. He probably could have had 2 touchdowns to Tyquan Thornton. That if he connects on, let's just say at least one of those. Different game than what happened, but I still think the Eagles could have found a way to basically make the Chiefs' efforts in vain. The Giants looked really good last week. I don't remember the last time I said that. But Russell Wilson looked like he was back in Seattle. Well, my question, will he be able to do that against a tougher Chiefs defense? For my score prediction, give me the Chiefs 24-14. I think the Chiefs will have a slow start, and people are going to be tweeting saying like, "Oh my God," they're going to be afraid and everything. But the Chiefs are going to figure it out. They're going to get their first win. It's going to be a little sloppy, but they're going to get it. Then for Monday Night Football, we have the Lions versus the Ravens. Both of these teams can light up the scoreboard. Both of these teams also have very good defenses. I imagine the Lions will probably have one of their faster players as a QB spy on Lamar Jackson. I would not be surprised if Brian Branch is used more like a QB spy because Brian Branch, he's a dog. He is a dog. But I also see a heavy dosage of Jameer Gibbs and David Montgomery to try to control the clock because I could see it being one of those games where they just want to minimize the time that the Ravens have on the field. They want to minimize the time that basically like having Lamar Jackson throw the ball or having Derrick Henry running the ball. Like every time that the Ravens have played against Jared Goff specifically, it has not looked good for Jared Goff. So they do kind of have the number. They have 2019, that game where the announcer referred to Lamar Jackson's performance as a Jackson 5. 2023, the Ravens had a great game against the Lions. And my question for the Ravens: will the Ravens play like the team, like the version of themselves that would dominate the better teams in the NFL, or will they play like a team that plays down to their opponent? In this instance, they wouldn't necessarily be playing down to their opponent, but if they play like like their best version of themselves, obviously the team that just went out and goes out and dominates everybody, I can see them winning this game. I've got no concerns about the Ravens offense. I think the Ravens offense will put up points on anybody. But that defense is what I'm more concerned about. The Lions have a lot of weapons on offense, and Jamison Williams, him being as fast as he is, Amon Ra being, just a player who can just rack up those targets quickly. He gets open. Sam Laporta, which I believe he got hurt last week, and then also the Lions running back room. It's scary hours, but I think this game can go either way. I believe that this game will look like maybe the Lions have a chance to get the win, but I believe the Ravens defense will make a key play to get them this win, 35-24. I want to thank you all for tuning into this week's episode of the I Am Passionate podcast. I'm your host, Jaren Smith, and I'll see you next time.